Right. So we want to talk a little bit about the Star Scholars program. Here is a link to our winter workshops that we can put in the chat. And Kathy also just put in the chat a PDF version of the slides that we'll go over tonight, and you can actually follow the links that we're talking about in that way. So what is STAR? So STAR stands for Scholarship, Transferable Skills, Academic Life, and Research. And we, as a program, have fall workshops like this one that are open to everyone. And then we do a winter mentoring program. Within that program often are first through third year students who are really hoping to get more information about research and gain some skills that are applicable to working in a research setting. So what this involves, there's details here as you can see on the slide, is weekly workshops that really, again, highlight interesting research fields within psychology, tell you a little bit more information about careers in psychology, what it means to follow this path, and also gives you transferable skills like resume and CV writing, how to apply to graduate school, gaining skills within a research setting. And then we meet for large workshops within the winter mentoring program and then smaller workshops as well. So it's a really engaging, interactive program. Kathy and I, the smaller workshops are led by current PhD students here at Michigan. And Kathy and I are both mentors, and there's a lot of other really great mentors across the program. So definitely, if you're a U of M student and interested in research in psychology, highly recommend and encourage you to apply. Those applications for the winter are due November 4th, and you can follow either that link in the chat or apply at the link here on the slide as well. All right, so let's get into the details about what we're here to talk about tonight, which is applying for grad school. So this is, we really, as you can tell from the title of this, want to encourage you to start now, start soon, wherever you're at in your journey in how far along you are in school, and maybe you've even graduated. We encourage you to start now regardless of where you're at. This right here is just a sort of general guideline we have of what might be helpful if you are interested in applying to grad school in psychology based on your year in school, what might be helpful. So during that freshman, sophomore year, kind of building skills, getting involved in research, doing summer programming. During your junior year, really settling in and figuring out, what do you like about research? What are topics or questions you're really excited about, interested in? And talk to maybe mentors or including graduate students or faculty maybe you have classes with that might be able to help you think about those research questions. And then building relationships either within a research lab or with faculty to identify mentors for possible independent study or honors projects. And then in your senior year, you can definitely complete an independent study or senior honors thesis, and then potentially apply to graduate school at that point in time. But that's not to say that you have to apply in your senior year of undergraduate. It's not too late by any means. If you're feeling, oh, maybe I don't have the skills to do that, or that I haven't thought a lot about what I might want to do, that's okay. It's actually not uncommon to take a couple years between undergrad and grad school within either a post-bac position or working in some sort of research lab or role. And it's becoming more and more common, especially in areas like mine, clinical, for people to take a couple years off, even if they have a lot of research experience from undergrad. So if you're feeling like, oh, I may be behind, absolutely not. It's not uncommon to take some time to gain some extra skills and learn more about what you might be excited about studying in graduate school. So that might bring up some really important questions of, if you are in that place where maybe you have a lot of skills and you're considering, do I want to apply this year or wait? If you feel like you maybe don't have enough time, or maybe don't have the skills or background that you might need, I really encourage you to not hesitate to wait until next year or the following year. or to, not hesitate to like take that time. If you feel like you've got the time and qualifications, you can definitely apply. But we have this helpful flow chart here to, what might help you with increasing your chances and thinking about what might be applicable for you. You might increase your chances of being admitted into a program if you do wait. Even if you might be unsure of what you want to do, but that could help with gaining, again, additional skills and gaining more information about what it is that makes sense to you. So again, this chart maybe isn't the end all be all, but it might be a helpful guide. So things to consider if you have a high GRE, if you don't, you might consider retaking that test and reapplying at a different point in time. Or maybe consider a full-time research job or master's program to boost your credentials and skills to develop and solidify your interests. I will say a little bit of a caveat. Some graduate programs are no longer requiring the GRE for admissions. That will vary a lot from program to program. So something certainly worth researching when you're looking at a lot of different programs, but something to as a little bit of a caveat. If you do have a high GPA or GRE and your GPA is maybe not so high, maybe consider again that full-time research job or master's program. If you've got all three of these, or both a high GRE and a high GPA, but you don't have a lot of research experience, again, maybe considering that full-time research job or master's program really to boost more of those skills. But if you have a lot of research experience, maybe think about, do I have an idea of what I actually want to study, what I would like to spend time in graduate school really focused on and curious about? And if you don't, that's okay. It might be a sign to maybe take some time and explore that further by getting some more experience in a research job or master's program. And, if you have an idea of what you want to experience and want to then ask, do I have the life experience I want, or idea of what you want to study, and then ask yourself what you might want to experience in life. And if you want to maybe think about, this might be a good chance to really do something that you always wanted to try out or is interesting to you between undergrad and graduate school. So we certainly, all these things are really important to consider when making that determination of, do you go straight from undergrad to graduate school and apply straight through, or take a couple years off? So if you kind of answer yes to all of these, then it might be a really good idea to think about applying now. This chart doesn't really include the contingency also, though, that you might not know what it's like to go to grad school or to be a professor. So we really do encourage you, if you are applying or thinking about applying, to talk with grad students and faculty to really find out what it's like, what's the day-to-day like, to really get a sense of whether this is what you want to do. Graduate school is a really long process and a lot of years and a lot of time and energy. So it's certainly a big decision to make for yourself. All right, so we wanted to talk a little bit, another plug, this is part of the Star Fall Seminar series, so you all are here for that. So we wanted to just do another plug for the series. So this is virtual and open to all students. So led by Star Scholar mentors like Kathy and myself, and then also our faculty director, Dr. Cindy Lustig, who usually is here, but she's actually at an event for Star tonight about regarding an award, so which is really exciting. So we see here we've got the session we have tonight. There's also going to be one October 4th on like, what is your role as an undergraduate student in research, and have a research panel of current undergrads who are RAs, research assistants in labs. And highly encourage you to look at the one on October 26th too, of how to get involved in research as an undergrad and what to do if you can't get a position this year. So that's a really helpful one. If you've been struggling to find a research lab or have questions on what that might look like, we certainly encourage that one too. November 10th, there's going to be applying to research opportunities. So the nitty gritty, what not to do, again, a really applicable one. And then December 6th, this is a really cool one as well, where we talk about what the day-to-day looks like for a PhD in psychology. So I like the title, Life of a Doctor, but not that kind. So what does a PhD in psychology really do? What might that look like from a career standpoint? All right. So we have another timeline here. I guess we had a flow chart before that sort of depicted, decisions about applying versus not at this point in time. And this is sort of a helpful guideline to think about in terms of what's that process and timeline that's going to be really helpful to consider as you are applying for graduate schools in psychology. So we really encourage you to start early. So in the summer before you're planning to apply, start researching grad schools you might be interested in and potential faculty advisors who you might want to work with, who you find that their research is really interesting and exciting for you. Start studying and take the GRE during that summer. We recommend maybe about 2 months of studying for the GRE. Kind of depends on the person and what you need or what you're comfortable with, but roughly 2 months. Again, the caveat being that many grad programs have moved away from the GRE, but certainly something to maybe research in advance over that summer, so you've got plenty of time to determine whether you need to take the GRE or not. We encourage you to, really organize your applications within a spreadsheet, really listing out, details about the program, what you like about it, what faculty you might be interested in working with. In September, starting that statement of purpose. That's a really important piece of your graduate application. So starting that early is really important to get a lot of drafts going, have multiple people read it, to really have that be a strong part of your application. September, start asking for letters of recommendation from professors who, maybe know you well. Maybe these are research advisors that you've worked with, people that can really speak to your skills and abilities as an individual. You can start contacting potential advisors at graduate schools as well. This says October. I think you could probably do it earlier if you wanted, but using that as a way to find out what faculty members are taking students, get your name out there, learn about their current research interests. We'll go into a little more detail about what that process might look like in a minute. Then around November, you're going to start sending out your GRE reports, your transcripts from your undergraduate institution. You're going to finalize that list of schools you'll apply to. Remind your letter writers. So sometimes things get buried in email, so always good to ask early, so then you can send those gentle reminders to those people who are going to write your letters of recommendation. And then submit your applications. Most applications are due early to mid-December. Kathy, is that consistent with what you had as well? Okay, so yeah, so I think most applications for graduate schools are early to mid-December. And we really definitely encourage you to make sure that all the materials that need to be there are complete and have made it to the school. So making sure all of the letters of recommendation are there, your transcripts there, all your details of your statements, your CV, everything has been included and sent to the university. And then around January, you might start to hear about some interviews, and who knows what this year and future years might look like. With the last several years with COVID, a lot of interviews have been virtual and have been handled that way. But in the past, many people would travel around a lot and go to different schools to interview at programs. And then you might start getting perhaps also some notifications that you don't get an interview or didn't make it into a program. But between February and March, you start hearing about whether you're admitted, maybe on a wait list, maybe you were not admitted to a program, start hearing that information. And then all final decisions about whether you accept any offers or have moved off of a wait list are made by April 15th. So it's a busy, jam-packed several months there. But we really encourage everyone to start early, to really put in a lot of time into researching different schools and programs and get that process going. All right, so this slide, I think, really speaks to the vast array of areas that psychology as a field can have graduate programs in, and there's some related fields here as well. So you see it's really diverse. There's a lot of different programs out there. There's a lot of different master's programs, PhD programs in these various disciplines. So, thinking a lot about what area you should pick is an important part of that decision-making process. So, thinking about whether, maybe it's clinical psychology or neuropsychology. Maybe you're really interested in biopsychology. Perhaps you're interested in related fields as well, like survey design or social work, things like that. So there's a vast array, a lot of different options out there. So an important piece of that graduate school application process is really thinking, is there one or maybe a couple different areas that I want to apply to programs in? And we're going to go into a little more detail here on the next slide on that. So we really encourage you, when you're thinking about what area you want to pick, is to focus on what you're interested in studying, thinking about what career you want to have, and that should help maybe narrow down what program would be best. If you're applying to programs where there's a lot of research, we do encourage you to think about applying to programs where the faculty members have similar research interests. So sometimes the area of research you're interested in, or the area you apply to, is less important than the research interest, unless you're interested in something really specific, like also having a clinical element to your training, where you would then want to pick a program like a clinical or counseling psychology program, where you have some of that built into your training. But if you're really excited about the research and not as much about the practice, you might be able to find that type of research in a different area of psychology. And Kathy actually might be able to speak to that a little bit. Kathy, if you'd want to share maybe.
Yeah, I applied to both clinical neuropsychology PhD programs and cognitive neuroscience PhD programs, but through the interview process, I realized that I actually was more interested in clinically oriented research, not necessarily providing clinical help. And so I ended up getting my PhD in a more research-oriented non-clinical program. So if anybody has any questions about that, they can private message me or email me or anything about that.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I put you on the spot there. But I think that's a really important piece, that, figuring out what pieces of training you want and what's going to be important to you and what excites you. So I am in a clinical program. So part of my training is I still do therapy practice, and then I also do research as well. So, thinking about what you are really hoping for your training. And then, as it says on this slide too, talking to faculty, professors, maybe graduate student instructors, supervisors you might have in your research lab or at work, anyone who maybe holds what you view as your dream job. What were the steps that they took to get there? How might that inform the path that you want to be on for your graduate training? So we spoke to this a little bit, but thinking about, what balance between these three areas would be important for you. So for instance, in my program, I have a balance of all of these. I've gotten the chance to do research, teaching, and clinical work practice as well. Some programs, there might just be mostly practice. Some programs might be research and practice. Some programs might be just research, and some programs might be research and training and teaching, sorry. So I think, thinking about what would you like to focus on with your training, and what would be important for you is a key part of looking at programs and what they require and what also they can provide you in terms of these areas. All right. So I wanted to just show this. This is a book. It's called Graduate Study in Psychology, that's published by the American Psychological Association. And they provide in this book a lot of program and department descriptions. They review a lot of degree options and admissions requirements for graduate programs in psychology. This is really important for clinical psychology. They provide a lot of information about programs that are accredited by the American Psychological Association, which is one of the big accreditation bodies for clinical psychology programs. So they provide some information on that. They also in this book cover information on tuition or coverage of your tuition by maybe teaching or research that you might be involved in while you're on campus. And then also talk about important dates and application deadlines. So that's a really helpful book. And then this website here, and I'll throw it in the chat super quick, also is like the companion website to this. And so they've got a lot of really helpful information, directory of graduate programs in psychology. So definitely take a look at that and see how that feels to you, and if there's information there that might be helpful for you. I'm unsure if the library has a copy of this book in particular, but certainly worth looking or seeing if you, certainly seeing what's on the website as well. All right. So we talked a lot about, programs and picking a program based on your interests and what you might be doing. But how do you find a program for graduate school? So these are just some ideas of how you might go about that. You might look at journal articles that you really loved and were excited about the research, and look at where the authors of that study, where they do their research, what university they're at. You might seek out some advice from faculty or professors you've had that you trust, and maybe they work in the field that you're really interested in. Academic advisors, we've got an awesome SAA advising team, so highly recommend talking with them, and they're a really great resource for all things graduate school and connecting with additional resources as well. You can look at also talking to your GSIs. Many of us, I think, have applied to many different programs, or we know peers at different programs. So we can be great resources in that way of directing you towards maybe other connections or other programs, or helping you with next steps in that way. And then US News also does rankings of programs as well. So looking at how a program, for instance, here at Michigan compares to a program at another university, or looking at what the rankings are for those programs. So that could be another place to do that. What to look out for when you are looking at different schools is looking at the research interests of faculty on the department websites. Do the faculty do the research you're interested in? Do they do something maybe that you're doing now and you want to continue that? Or maybe they are researching a topic or a question that you want to expand on and spend more time on in your graduate studies. Take a look out for recent faculty publications. Not all websites are updated regularly. As you begin your search, you'll see that very, very quickly. So definitely take a look at the faculty profiles and get a sense of, what's the research that they're doing currently. Because sometimes people might be really well known for one thing, but they've shifted gears, or, they might have started their career on one topic, but they're now doing something completely different. So definitely worth taking a look at what their recent publications are to get a good sense of what the research is that they're doing currently. Websites of schools also are really helpful for seeing what the requirements are for the PhD. So both admissions requirements, what are they looking for in the student that they want to accept to their program, as well as information on the PhD itself. They might have information on the structure, the curriculum, those sorts of things. And you might get a sense of the program, the feel of the program. How do they talk about their program, what their values are as a program, all of those pieces. All right, so finding graduate programs here, we really encourage you to start with a long list in Excel. Again, you can look at master's and PhD. If you can apply to both at the same time. It's certainly, you don't have to apply to one versus the other. And I like this Excel sheet here. They detailed out the school, where it was located, the application deadline. So we see a lot of these were December 1st, December 15th. The GRE code, so again, that might vary school to school. The cost of the application fee. I'm guessing this is related to how many transcripts are needed or in what format. The website for the program you're applying to. And then this is really helpful. They listed out the specific faculty member that they were really interested in working with. And then they gave some details here about the research that person is doing. And they had collected some information either from the department website or through directly contacting the faculty as to whether they are accepting a student for the next year or not. So definitely encourage this sort of format for getting information. This is a really important step of applying, kind of keeping track of all the information you find as you go. So this doesn't necessarily only help you with just deciding where to apply, but also with writing your personal statements and statements of purpose for these programs, really tailoring to what the interests are for that faculty, how you fit with that research program that they're working on, and why you really are excited about their school and program. Definitely, again, we encourage you to ask professors and grad students, for advice about programs. They might have colleagues at certain places or contacts or peers. So certainly worth taking a look at those and getting a sense of that. All right. Whoops. I messed up my screen here. Sorry, everyone. Okay, yeah. Really, again, kind of in this pre-application, before you submit your applications, preparation is really essential. So really focusing on which faculty are conducting research in your areas of interest. Are the faculty accepting students? Because most programs follow this sort of general theme that you're applying to work with a specific faculty member or faculty members at times, not a general program. Many graduate school programs use that sort of mentorship model where you're applying to work with an individual and really tailoring your application to show how your interests, research interests fit with that person. So you can actually consider sending a cover letter and resume to all professors you would even consider working for the summer before you apply, just to get, again, your name out there, start contacting people and get a sense of, whether they're accepting students or not. Some other things to think about when you're selecting schools and faculty you might be interested in working with at those programs is whether checking their publication record of the professor. In graduate school, your publications are kind of your currency. So thinking about, how often is the faculty member publishing with their students? Do they tend to publish a lot with other people? Are they publishing a lot with their students? Or are you really not seeing many recent publications at all? So those might be important questions, because as a new grad student, you likely want to be working with someone that has ongoing research, that is actively working on publications and incorporating their grad students to really be a part of that research team. So So thinking about that's really important. And then what's the quality and quantity of their publications? So you might have someone who has a lot of publications, but what's the quality of that work? Versus you might have someone who has very few, but they're really high quality. Or you might see someone who, again, maybe doesn't have very recent publications. So that also might be an important thing to think about. So this last question is a little bit vague. What is the status of the professor? And that can mean a lot of different things. It could mean like their notoriety in the field, and it can also mean their level of tenure. Are they an assistant professor? So pre-tenure, are they an associate professor, or are they a full professor? Not necessarily always true, but sometimes the ranking of assistant, associate, or full professor may correlate to the type of mentor. These are kind of generalizations. So again, not necessarily always true, but some things to think about. But often assistant professors are just starting off their careers. They're really active because they're trying to get a lot of publications done so that they can get tenure. So we often don't have as much information to see what kind of mentor they are. They may maybe have a couple students, or you could potentially even maybe be their first graduate student. An associate professor, they're out of that assistant professor, they have tenure, so they don't have so many responsibilities at that point in time. But they're still really active, but they've gotten a little more experience being a mentor and being involved in that process. Full professors are more well known. They tend to have more connections and resources. Sometimes they can have really big labs, though. They might have many different graduate students. So it might vary how much contact you have with that person. But again, none of these are 100%. There certainly is variation at every level. You might have a full professor that has just a couple grad students. It really depends. So certainly things to look at. Take a look at the lab website, see how many grad students there are, get a sense of those sorts of things. All right. So getting down to that final list of where you want to apply for graduate school, we really encourage you to find programs with the best fit. So that, what does fit mean? So faculty that have similar research interests to you. If you have a program where you've contacted the faculty member and you've had a really positive interaction, that's a great sign. I know when I was applying, one of my friends was applying too, and she had a couple places where before she even applied and had an interview, the faculty member set up a call for her with some of the current grad students in the lab, and she got us a really great sense of, the advisor, the program, etc. Certainly that's not necessarily standard, but take note of whether the person, sometimes you might reach out to faculty and they never reply to you. And sometimes maybe you have a great interaction with them over email or what have you. So pay attention to that. And then also paying attention to whether you meet their criteria. So going back to that program website, do they have a requirement for, if they accept GRE or are requiring GRE scores, do they have a requirement for that? Do they have a requirement or any criteria they have for how much research experience or what research background they expect their students to have? Another cool thing or nice thing to think about too is, if you're applying to a program, is there more than one faculty member that you could see yourself working with? Because that other person, might be a collaborator, could be, someone that down the road might be on a dissertation committee, various things. So definitely a bonus if you have a program where there's multiple potential advisors. And then we do encourage, having a few safety schools as well as a few reach schools and some in between. And you don't have to tell anyone, friends, family, where your advisors, who you're applying to work with, what schools are safety versus reach. You can keep that to yourself, but knowing how you individually might categorize some of those is certainly good to have a variety of options and opportunities available to you. All right. And then we have a few guidelines here about contacting professors. So as we talked about in that timeline before, this is a great way to get a sense of the professors you're hoping to work with at graduate programs. So here's some information. We do encourage you to email the professors you're interested in working with, introduce yourself and how you feel your interests might overlap. And then ask for some more information. Maybe ask them what their current projects are, if they have future research directions that they're working on. So again, maybe they're working on one thing, but they just got a big grant and they're going to start, some research that's maybe a little bit different. Are they actually taking students for the next academic year? And then what are their current grad students working on? Do their grad students work on, their research funded grants or grant funded research, or are they working on independent projects? What are grad students in the lab working on? And then we do encourage you to check faculty websites as well. Some faculty have really specific information they want you to include in an email to them. And they might actually list on their website too if they are accepting students or not, although that again might not always be up to date. So always a good thing to see when things have been updated and not, but definitely worth checking faculty websites to make sure that you're including any information that they would want from you. And then this next slide here is a really nice template, and I'll leave this up for a couple minutes so you can read this over. But this is a nice template that just shows a generic sort of email you might send to a professor that you're interested in working with in graduate school. So opens by saying your name, who you are, what program you're applying for, and then why you're interested in working with that person. So you can see here this person laid out their interest in the current projects they're working on and finding out more about those and any future projects. So again, they really reiterate their fit with the program and their interest in that. They attached a copy of their CV and keep it open for communication. So this is again just a very nice generic sort of email. So I'm going to pause there so you all can just read through that real quick, and then we'll check in just a minute. All right. So I'm going to go to my last slide, which is our switching point to Kathy. So we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit more about applying now and what that will look like. Before I do that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I know Kathy's going to transition to sharing her screen. I want to just see if there's any questions while we're kind of working on that transition. Feel free to either put it in the chat or do the raise hand function. All right, not hearing anything, I'll turn it over to Kathy.
All right, thanks, Abby. Okay, so, oh wait, we have one question. Is there anything you didn't do during your application process that you wish you did? Ooh, great question. Okay, this is kind of, we'll talk about this later on, but when selecting which programs to apply to, I limited myself more than I should have. I should have paid more attention to schools that were in different geographical locations in the United States. I should have paid attention more to schools that may not have been as famous as some of the other schools I applied to, because after I got into grad school, I realized that actually there's a lot of research out there at like schools that I never even thought of going to because the professor was there. And so I wish I had had more of an open mind during my application process than I did. What about you, Abby? It's a great question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I wish I would have talked to some more grad students. I think often grad students are going to give you very candid accounts of their experiences in grad school and of programs and things like that. So I think, that's a really important part if you get that opportunity to chat with grad students, even if it's not maybe at a school you're applying to, but at this university, maybe a GSI in the area you're applying to or something like that. I think that would have been something that would have been a helpful just to even understand that the application process a little more. But I think grad students can be really great support and informative people to chat with. Yeah, it's a really good question.
All right, if there's no other questions, we can move on to the application checklist. And Abby can respond to any questions in the chat that come up, or Abby, feel free to like interrupt what I'm saying and ask the question. Okay, so you're ready to apply. What's actually involved? There's actually quite a few components that make up an application to get your PhD. Some parts of the application might be online. So for example, the application form, some letter of recommendations, but other parts of the application might actually be sent through the mail. So for example, transcripts, some letters of recommendation, sometimes you'll have to send your writing sample in the mail. It's a lot to organize. And so we highly, highly, highly recommend using a spreadsheet to keep track of how much you like each school, the information about each program, and the logistics of actually applying. So just to quickly go over what's actually involved, you need a statement of purpose. And this statement of purpose is to convince the admissions committee that you are the right choice for their program. You'll need to send your transcripts to all the schools you've attended. You'll need at least 2 letters of recommendation. Sometimes schools will ask for 3. You'll need a GRE maybe. So the question mark next to the GRE score reports is because not all universities require the GRE anymore. You'll actually have to fill out the university's application form, getting information like your name, your birthday, stuff like that. Sometimes the department itself will have an application form. You'll need to send your curriculum vitae, which is a CV or a resume. A CV is the academic version of a resume. And then sometimes you'll have to send a writing sample. This is usually optional, but if you have like a stellar writing sample, for example, an honors thesis that you want to show off, it could be a good opportunity to showcase some of your skills. Okay, so just a note about 2 things, the transcripts and the writing sample. The transcripts could be an unofficial transcript. Some schools require you to send an official transcript, meaning that you'll have to contact the University of Michigan's registrar office, or I can't remember what office it is. And you'll also want to provide transcripts of all the schools you've attended, especially for you transfer folks. You'll need to send a transcript from all of the schools. And for the writing sample, like I said, it's not required, but it's recommended. And you can send your honors thesis, a research paper you wrote for a class. If you actually have some sort of publication, that could honestly be a really good writing sample to send. Okay, so here are some tips on how to stay organized. Try to have all of your necessary documents in one place. So a folder that contains a PDF of your GRE scores, have your GPA or unofficial transcript on hand, login information for each online portal. We recommend using Excel or a folder, like I said, and try to spend at least 5 hours every week working on your application materials, whether that be looking for professors you could work with, working on your personal statements, etc. And a way that we recommend doing the application process is to think of it like another class in your schedule. So if you know, for example, on Tuesdays or Thursdays, you have to study for one of your classes, Psych 240, for example, think of applying to grad school as another class. Like every Wednesday from 5 to 7, you have to apply, you have to work on your application materials. So this slide shows a pie chart of the 6 components most admissions committees will be looking at when they're reviewing your application. So notably, the one that's weighed the most heavily is research experience. But admissions committees also consider your GPA, your letters of recommendation, your GRE scores. But again, there's a major question mark with that. Admissions committees might also consider any psychology relevant extracurriculars and any other extracurriculars. Just note that the GRE is actually a pretty small portion of what admissions committees are looking at, and a lot of schools are not requiring the GRE anymore. So it's really important to double check the admissions requirements for every school you apply to. In terms of extracurriculars, if you do want to showcase some of them, you really want to highlight how this extracurricular provided you with skills that are going to be relevant for grad school. So for example, leadership skills or any activities related to diversity, equity, inclusion. What's key in extracurriculars and also research experience is that it actually looks better to have 1 or 2 activities that you played a major role on rather than 8 activities that you just kind of participated in just so you could list it on your resume. Admissions committees are really looking for depth, not necessarily breadth. Okay, so let's talk about the GRE. There's a verbal, quantitative, so math and essay component of the GRE, and the importance of the GRE actually varies. So the University of Michigan does not require the GRE at all. And even if you did submit your GRE scores to a grad program at U of M, the admissions committee will not even consider it as part of your admissions package. And so I mean, it varies by school, but I wouldn't necessarily stress out too much about the GRE, especially since it is just a smaller part of your entire application package. So for clinical programs, just because of the sheer volume of the applications, I've heard that clinical programs are some of the programs that do have GRE cutoffs. But again, that might not be the case. There's also a GRE subject test specifically for psychology, similarly to how the SAT had subject tests. Very few schools require or recommend you take the psychology subject test. The only instance in which I think this is really important is if you were not an undergrad psych major and you want to demonstrate that you do have the background psychology proficiency in order to get a doctorate in psychology, you might want to take the psychology subject test. But other than that, it's might not be worth it. I will say when I was applying to programs 5 years ago, I did have to submit psychology subject test scores, but it was very rare. It was like 1 or 2 schools on my list. Okay, so let's say you are applying this year and you do want to go to a school that requires the GRE. Our recommendation would be to take the GRE as soon as possible. The scores are valid for 5 years, but it does take time to receive and send the scores. And also you might need to retake it if you're not happy or confident with the score that you've got. Realistically, you should spend 1 to 3 months preparing for the GRE. There are websites or apps and classes and books online. The ETS, which is the company that does the GRE, has practice exams, and then at those classic test preparation companies like Princeton Review and Kaplan also have books and resources for preparing the GRE. So the GRE does cost money, which is incredibly annoying. It costs money to take the actual tests, and it also costs money to send the scores to each school. But one hack is that if you already know 3 schools that you definitely are going to apply to, you can actually send those schools your GRE scores if you know the day that you take the test and mark that. So you will have the opportunity to send 3 free score reports to schools, but you just have to know that in advance. Okay, so let's talk about the most important part of your graduate school application, which is your statement of purpose. And this is a 1.5 to 2 page paper that talks about your research history, your research interests, and why you want to go to this particular school. And this is really key here. Like, this is how you basically sell yourself to the program and convince them that they should let you in. And you also convince them that this particular program is the one that you truly belong to. Some schools, like the University of Michigan, will break up the statement of purpose into a research statement of purpose, so what you actually want to do research-wise, and also a personal statement, like what are the personal things in life that led you to the decision to pursue a graduate career. So I want to talk about one possible structure to your statement. You might want to talk about why psychology / your research area excites you. You'll definitely want to talk about your research experiences, and you'll want to state your specific interests. You also want to say your plans for graduate school and beyond, talk about what you want to study broadly, and specifically mention why you want to apply to this specific school. You can talk about the faculty, you can talk about the resources the school provides, you can talk about like concentrations the school offers, networking opportunities, etc. So some tips. Try to avoid any cliches. Show, don't tell, don't be arrogant. And what I mean by show, don't tell, we'll talk about on another slide. And try to be concise. Clear, competent writing is going to go over way better with the admissions committee compared to creative writing. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to realize that you should be admitted into this program. A tip that I have, that we all have, is to have as many people read it as possible. Parents, friends, GSIs, if they're willing, if you have any research mentors, if you're close to the PI of the lab that you're working with and they have time and are willing to read your statement, this feedback is incredibly valuable. And then another big tip, do not use the same exact statement for each program. Going back to why this particular school, it's really important that you tailor your statements to reflect each school that you want to apply to, which I know is easier said than done, but that's really key into helping the admissions committee realize that you are a good fit at the school. Okay. So here are some examples of don'ts. So this paragraph starts off with, psychology has always been of particular interest to me, as I have commonly empathized with and wish to help others. So this is, although it might be true for you, incredibly cliche. And so try to avoid any of these cliche openings. So the second sentence, while attending the blank university, I took several classes related to close and romantic relationships. I believe I am prepared to attend graduate school at blank university due to my hard work ethic and academic success. In some of my undergrad classes, I acquired practice in psychology and developed a deep passion for the field. So first of all, the writer of this does not talk about any research experience specific to their interests. They did talk about classes, which is great, but they didn't list like what classes they took or what specifically they found interesting about these classes. They're overconfident in the statement that says, I'm prepared to attend graduate school due to my hard work ethic and academic success. There's no additional information. They're not backing up their claims. And it's really lacking in specificity. So here are some examples of do's. So this first sentence here is it's a compelling opening. So during the past 3.5 years, I've gained a wealth of knowledge from 2 unexpected sources. You're on your toes now. You're like, whoa, what are the unexpected sources? And then you say the female long Evans rat and the vaginal photoplasmograph. This is clearly not my personal statement because I don't know how to say that word. And then the next paragraph, the writer goes into detail about their research experiences. They specifically list the lab that they worked in. They list the population of their research subjects. They talked about the exact study that they participated in. They mentioned that they did an independent research project and what they actually did in the lab. So it's super specific. It really shows that they did the things in research that will set them up to be a great graduate student. And it also shows that they actually understand the research that they were involved in, and they're able to communicate it very well and knowledgeably. Here are more examples of, here's another example of do's. And so my experience in the sexual psychophysiology laboratory solidified my desire to pursue the study of human sexuality in graduate school, a desire originally sparked by my human sexuality course at Southwestern University. So right there, another compelling opening, another compelling continuation, and basically super specific. And they say exactly what they want to do in grad school. Other things that should be included in the statement of purpose, that's kind of in italics, is what else should go in here. So a final paragraph on why that specific school, listing the specific faculty members they want to work with, and then also their future career goals. Any questions so far about the statement of purpose, do's and don'ts? Okay, so let's move on to letters of recommendation. So like I said earlier, you usually need a minimum of 2 letters, but generally you need 3 letters. And it's best if these come from research advisors. So people who you've worked with in a research setting. Graduate students can and usually do help primary investigators write letters of recommendation, but it's best if the letter is signed by the actual principal investigator of the lab. The letters can also come from professors or previous employers who know you well and can write a good letter. And the key really is to establish these relationships early. The longer you've known whoever's writing the letter of recommendation, the more things and the better things they can say about you. I personally had 2 letters from research advisors, and then my final letter was from a professor whose class I took that I performed particularly well in, and it was a smaller class. So he actually got to know me and like understood how I worked in an academic setting or like a class setting, not necessarily a research setting. So how to ask for letters of recommendation. Be polite, give your letter writers at least 1 month advance notice. It is pretty unfair for you to ask a letter writer to write a letter within a week of the deadline, and don't make assumptions. Frame it as, if this is something you would be willing to do and believe that you could provide me with a strong letter of recommendation. And what you really want is a strong letter of recommendation. You don't necessarily want somebody to write you a letter that basically says, oh yeah, like Kathy is okay. Like she would probably make a good grad student. The admissions committee reading that would probably be like, this is a little bit dicey. Do not submit the professor, the recommender's contact information before they agree to write the letter, because they will probably ignore that request if it comes from an automated website that collects letters of recommendation. So over email can be a good way to ask. But you might also want to schedule an in-person or online face-to-face meeting to talk about your interests and the programs you're applying to, so that the letter recommender can tailor the letter to the specific program or your specific interests. It would be best to provide your letter writers a bunch of information to make the process easier. So give them a packet that includes a list of the names of schools and the programs that you're applying to, the deadlines for each school, which is really important, what the actual application instructions are. For the most part now, it's like an online portal submission system, but you might see rare cases where you'll have to mail in a letter of recommendation. It would be incredibly helpful for your letter writer to have a draft of your personal statement. This really lets the letter writer see where your head is and then tailor the letter to match what you say in your personal statement. You'll also want to send your CV, your transcripts, and your GRE scores. If you have them, the GRE score, again, is a major question mark. And this is just to show the letter, to give the letter writer some additional information about you, so they can, for example, allude to the fact that you did super cool research in your lab while also maintaining a stellar GPA. And that's really impressive. It's really important and nice to send a reminder email close to the deadline. If your letter recommender is a professor, they're super busy, and even grad students are super busy. And so we need extra reminders, and make sure to thank your letter writers. It's not necessary to give a gift. In fact, some letter writers don't like it. However, nothing's stopping you from a nice thank you note or a card, especially if you got into the program that your recommender wrote a letter for you. That's really nice. I know for my letter recommenders, when I got into the University of Michigan and decided to commit here, I gave them all U of M mugs. And I wrote a little thank you note to say thank you for helping me get into grad school. And I think they liked it, but I don't know, I've never seen one of my letter recommenders drink out of it. So, okay. So let's talk about your curriculum vitae or CV. So this is similar to a resume, but it's formatted differently. And it's basically a massive list of everything you've accomplished in your academic career. So the example I'm showing you is super loaded. Do not be intimidated by this. So Crystal, who was a former STAR mentor, she was a rock star. I just want to say you do not need to have this much stuff on your CV to get into grad school. Obviously, it doesn't hurt and it will help, but again, you do not need this much stuff on your CV to get into grad school. But your CV should touch on your education, any awards that you've won. It should talk about your research experiences, and make sure to describe your research experiences in bullet points, and list the PI or the principal investigator that you worked with. And so like you can see here, Crystal included her position when she was the research assistant here, also the principal investigator, and then a description of the project and what she actually did in the lab. Make sure to proofread your CV and make sure it's up to date by the time you send in the application. So any questions about the application materials? Okay, so let's say you submitted your application. Now you can breathe a little bit lighter, and now you're just waiting to hear back. So after you submit your application, in general, so actually this varies based on the school, and it also varies based on the department within the school. So sometimes you'll have a phone interview before final decisions are made. These are short and informal. It's usually a phone interview with the principal investigator, and they're just trying to get to know you a little bit better. If there was any ambiguity in your research statements, or they weren't sure like whether you'd be a better fit for this type of grad program versus the grad program you applied to, they might get you on the phone and talk about it. However, the serious and more formal interviews are the in-person interviews or a recruitment weekend. So again, some recruitment weekends are for the school to screen the applicants, meaning that you are being interviewed during the weekend. Other recruitment weekends are for the applicants to screen the schools, meaning that you've already been admitted to the program and they want to invite you to the school to just see how your life could look if you came to the school. So I know that in the psychology department, actually, so like cognition and cognitive neuroscience, my area, and Abby's area, clinical, we have interview weekends. And so we are interviewing the applicants to see if they would be a good fit in the program. So they haven't gotten in yet. However, other areas, so personality and social contexts, by the time you come to recruitment weekend, you've already been accepted. And so the point of recruitment weekend for those areas is to show off the University of Michigan to the newly admitted students to try to convince them to come here. And so when you come to a recruitment weekend or an in-person interview, it means that you've been shortlisted. You are at the top of the people being considered to join the program. And just keep in mind that you're interviewing 24/7. Also, even if you're attending an in-person interview, you should still be asking questions and getting as much information as possible, and basically critically evaluating the school that you're interviewing with to see if you would actually want to go there. And so it goes both ways. They want to see if, so the programs wants to see if you're a good fit, and then you should also see if the program is a good fit. So here's some questions you should ask either at the recruitment weekend, which is highly recommended, maybe before or after, but this is information that's really important. You should ask, are the students independent, or do the research supervisors have more of a role in directing their research? And this is a question you would ask the grad students. You should also ask, how many grad students does the researcher have? You can imagine that investigators with more grad students can spend less time on each individual grad student, but maybe that's what you would prefer. Maybe you would prefer to be more independent. You should also ask about the nature of the program and of the people. Is the vibe more collaborative? Everybody's working together, they're all looking out for each other, or is it more competitive? Are there a limited amount of resources that people are not fighting each other, but are competing to get? Ask the current and past students the pros and cons of working with that specific principal investigator, because it's the grad students that really have the information. And then the logistics, ask about the financial package, whether you need to do a practicum, and this is specific for clinical programs, and other logistics. I would say for the most part, most of the best PhD programs are fully funded, meaning there's a tuition waiver, and they also add a living stipend. But some living stipends are better than other living stipends, and that's an important consideration when you're actually making your decision. Which brings me to different factors of making decisions of where to go to grad school. So I touched on this earlier when I answered a question about what I wish I had done when considering grad schools. But some overrated factors for the grad program is the prestige of the university itself, the prestige of the faculty advisor, the absolute stipend, the location, whether it's a fun city, the actual visit, like the recruitment visit, and the fact that it's where you got in. You should not just go to a school because it's where you got in. The underrated factors, or the factors you really should be considering when making decisions about graduate school, is the research match. How much do you love the research that that faculty is doing. Also consider the personality of the faculty advisor. This is somebody that you'll be working with for at least 4 or 5 years. And so if you don't get along with them personality wise, your working relationship might not be the best. You might also want to think about the other students. Are these people you could be collaborators with, peers with, friends with? Because once you enter grad school, the other students there are going to be your network. They're going to be your support system, hopefully. You should also think about departmental collaborations. Are there a lot of interdisciplinary projects going on? Do a lot of the faculty know each other across departments? You should also think about the money aspect of it. Does the department have a lot of money? Are there a lot of resources for you to apply to, like grants specific to grad students in psychology, things like that? And what about your lab? How funded is your lab? Do they have enough research to fund your personal studies? Or are you tied to a grant that you would have to work off of? Another really key thing is taking time off. How amenable is the principal investigator or the culture of the program in taking time off? Mental health is really, really important, especially in grad school, and taking time off to recharge and rest is incredibly important. And so if you get the vibe that the people in this department and area and grad school are overworked and they never get a break, that might be something to consider when making a decision about grad school. So be nice. If you're an incredibly competitive candidate and you get multiple offers for grad school, that's spectacular. But if you know that you don't want to go to a specific school, don't hang on to that offer, because even if you don't want to go to that school, it could be someone else's dream school. Oh, another note that I should say is the difference between absolute stipend and relative stipend. So schools in really high cost of living cities like San Francisco, New York, you might have a stipend that sounds better than others, but like think about how much further $30,000 stipend goes in Lawrence, Kansas than it does in Manhattan, New York. And so if you are considering a school in a more high cost of living area, you should consider, like, can I actually live off of this stipend? And of course, if you have 2 schools that match everything on the underrated factors, perfect research match, amazing fit with faculty, the other students are fantastic, then maybe you can start thinking about the prestige of the university or where the university actually is, and stuff like that. Any questions about this? Okay. The next slide talks about some optional fellowships. So one of them is the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program, or the NSF GRFP. This and the Ford Foundation Predoctoral Fellowship is specifically geared toward students early on in the academic process. So you can apply for the NSF and the Ford Fellowship as an undergrad, but you also have another opportunity to apply to these fellowships during your first 2 years of grad school. And so these are 2 fellowships that are really interesting, and I would recommend checking them out. If you get one of these fellowships, this honestly does increase the likelihood that you would get into your top choice graduate career, because these fellowships would actually fund your doctoral studies and provide a living stipend on top of the tuition waiver for that school. So it's pretty cool. So now is a time where I'm going to plug applying to the University of Michigan. If you downloaded the PDF of the slides, all these links are clickable. So I want to note that there are some rumors, or like sometimes you'll get a vibe from faculty members, especially like senior faculty members, that it's not great to go to grad school where you did your undergrad. And the reason for this is that if you go to undergrad somewhere for 4 years, then you are familiar with the environment, you know the professors, and you've learned a lot. And if you leave, you can then take that knowledge that you gained and spread it to somewhere new, and then also learn even more new things and be exposed to a different academic culture and different academic faculty at a new school. However, I want to dispel that myth, and I want to strongly encourage, even though you're University of Michigan undergrads or University of Michigan postbacks, to apply to the University of Michigan, especially if you are an underrepresented student. And so the University of Michigan is actually highly looking for University of Michigan undergrads to apply to the graduate programs. And so again, these are links that you can click. And yeah, so why Michigan? Well, there's a ton of doctoral programs here, 109, according to the slide, and there's 92 master's degrees and 30 plus certificate programs. And not only, so this is good if you're in a doctoral program, because it means that you can take those, you can get those certificates, or you can like dip your toes in some of these master's classes and programs. There's also tailored resources and support for students with different needs. So for example, if you're a parent, a veteran, if you identify as disabled, undocumented, etc., the University of Michigan is one of the richest schools in the country. And so they have ample funding opportunities. So like I said earlier, when considering the financial benefits of going to an institution, the University of Michigan has one of the best, in my opinion. Graduate students pretty much don't have to compete for funding for their research or traveling for conferences and stuff. The University of Michigan just has built-in grants for University of Michigan graduate students to apply to and get. And then the University of Michigan is really pushing for DEI efforts and trying to make a more inclusive environment for people with diverse backgrounds. Here's some examples of all the financial support offered by the University of Michigan. There's the RACA Merit Fellowship, Graduate Student Research Grants, International Research Awards, and so on and so forth. Again, there's a community here. If you do identify as first generation, around 23% of UM grad students are first gen. There's entire first gen support networks. Rackham has a club or organization specifically for students of color, and there's over 1,000 grad student organizations here. This slide has a link to additional resources, and again, these are clickable, or they should be clickable on the PDF. If you can't click on any of these, just let me know. And one last plug for the University of Michigan. The University of Michigan Psychology Department does host a virtual diversity recruitment weekend in order to try to get underrepresented cultural, geographic, or educational backgrounds into learning more about the university. And so if you attend the session, you get a special extension. The application is actually closed, but we're reopening it just for you all who are attending the session. It does close tomorrow, I think, at 8 a.m. So if you do want to apply to the University of Michigan, I would try to go to this virtual diversity recruitment weekend. You'll get more advice on applying to grad school and writing statements. You'll get virtual tours of different areas of psychology. You'll have individual meetings with faculty, which is a good place to like get your name out there. You'll get advice on how to survive and thrive in grad school, and meet with grad students about their perspective. So the application is on the slides, and so you should be able to go to that link. Any questions? You can unmute, you can put them in the chat.
We had a question about whether the recording will be accessible to everyone. I believe it's posted on the STAR website from my understanding. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, that is
Okay.
my understanding as well.
We do have the PDF. I will put that back in the chat again.
Yes, so I think if the bottom of this page, if you Google like STARS fall seminars, UMich, and then click around, eventually you will get to a page where they link all of the fall seminars YouTube videos. So, okay, so could I know what the current acceptance rate is? Elizabeth, are you specifically referring to the University of Michigan's acceptance rate for grad school, or like in general? Because I don't know if I know the answer to either. For Michigan, I am not sure. From a grad student perspective, I do know that it's not necessarily about like the rate or luck. It's really just about fit. And rate of acceptance. I also think it depends on the area. So for example, clinical is notoriously way more competitive with a way lower acceptance rate than cognition and cognitive neuroscience, for example. The vast majority of students who apply to get their PhD in psychology want to do clinical psychology. So again, I don't know the exact numbers. I don't know if the University of Michigan releases that information. Abby, do you know?
I don't know if it's publicly available. I think the rule of thumb I've often heard for clinical PhD programs, especially those that are fully funded and APA accredited, and have some of those parameters, the acceptance rate tends to be below 5%. So I believe for U of M, typically our program, the acceptance rate is around 2 to 3% for the clinical specifically, but that is likely, as Kathy mentioned, different in other areas. And I'm guessing it varies school to school as well.
Yeah. So that's for PhD programs. For masters, it could be a different story. So those of you who are undergraduates at the University of Michigan right now, you have the opportunity, I think, to do the, what is it called? The program where you get your master's after 4 years. Do you know what I'm talking about, Abby? What is that called?
Yes, I actually completed it. So
oh, okay, perfect.
That's called the Accelerated Master's Degree Program through the Department of Psychology. I'll put that name in the chat. That is a program that's specifically for Michigan undergrads to do a 5th year, and you get your master's. So you start in your senior year taking some graduate level courses, start working on your thesis, and then your 5th year you finish your thesis and take graduate level coursework. And yeah, I had a really great experience in it. And that was a great way for me to get some additional research experience that I needed to go on for a PhD. So it's a really great program, and right here in the psychology department.
Any other questions? Okay, well, if there are no more questions, thank you all for attending the session. I hope to see you at another one. I'm happy to stick around if people have questions that are very specific that they don't want to like ask the whole group. So yeah, have a good rest of your night, everyone.
Yeah, and before everybody jumps off, for those interested in data on acceptance and programs, I just put a link in the chat from the American Psychological Association. But thanks, everybody.
Yes, so let me put my email in the chat.
There's fine. Yeah, feel free to reach out.